Welcome to Panels and Borders. I'm Dominic. So it's been a while since there's been any news about the new Dune film, but I found this article I thought was kind of interesting on BBC's website, and it's all about Jodorowsky's Dune film that was never made. So this article, this guy's making a case of how this would have been like such a legendary film if it had been made, and it's kind of like a what if. So I'm going to go through the article because it's kind of interesting. Is Jodorowsky's Dune the greatest film never made? Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which is due out next year, looks as if it might have one of the all-time great casts. The Oscar-nominated Timothée Chalamet is its star. The supporting actors include Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin, Oscar Isaac, Rebecca Ferguson, Charlotte Rampling, and Jason Momoa. But Villeneuve, the French-Canadian director of Sicario, Arrival, and Blade Runner 2049, will need all the help he can get if his film is to compete with an earlier adaptation of the same novel. I don't mean the David Lynch version from 1984, which should be logged near the top of any sensible list of the worst sci-fi films in history. Nor do I refer to the miniseries that was on US cable channel Sci-Fi, now called Sci-Fi, in 2000. The most significant and impressive screen version of Frank Herbert's science fiction bestseller is one that was never actually made. So I'm going to disagree with him right off the bat about David Lynch's Dune being at the top of any sensible worst films in history. David Fincher's Dune is, I think, still very solid, even though it wasn't really highly regarded among Dune fans. I still would consider Dune to be a solid sci-fi film, and there's a lot of people who's a fan of that movie, and it's definitely, I think if you're a sci-fi fan, I think it would be in your at least top 50 or 100 films that you should watch, sci-fi films. So I'm going to disagree with him there on that one. The film's writer-director was Alejandro Jodorowsky, a Chilean-born avant-garde theater veteran who made two of the most gloriously surreal films of the 1970s, or indeed any other decade. El Topo, 1970, was roughly what you would get if Clint Eastwood remade Alice in Wonderland as a Western, and Monty Python remade it as a satirical farce, and then scenes from both films were cut together with extra whipping and nudity. The Holy Mountain, 1973, partly funded by John Lennon, was even weirder. Kanye West borrowed its psychedelic religious imagery when staging his Yeezus tour in 2013, and back in the 1970s, both films helped establish the midnight circuit of films that were best watched late at night, preferably after ingesting a mood-altering substance or two. Here's a shot from El Topo. I've never seen any of his movies, but I really want to see them. I'm very curious to see how strange they are. Because they do look really... Because I kind of like tracking down movies that are very bizarre and watching them and just to see what they're like. I kind of have like odd tastes of movies like that. As bamboozling as they were, El Topo and The Holy Mountain were so profitable that a French producer, Michael Seydoux, contacted Jodorowsky in 1974, offered to fund whichever film he fancied making next. Jodorowsky chose a science fiction novel, Dune. When Seydoux agreed, Jodorowsky realized that he'd now have to sit down and read it. Published in 1965, Herbert's novel chronicles the battle for control of the desert planet called Arrakis, or Dune. Its teenage hero, Paul Atreides, leads armies and rides giant worms. And so, in the days before digital effects, putting Herbert's sprawling interstellar saga on screen would have been a colossal feat. But Jodorowsky didn't just want to adapt a book. He wanted to change the public's perceptions, change the young minds of all the world. He wouldn't be making a mere film, he recalls in a 2014 documentary. Jodorowsky's Dune. He'd be making an artistical, cinematographical god. That's interesting. He really had a grand vision for this movie. Can't deny that at all. Spiritual warriors. This grand mystical tone was typical of the project. Seydoux rented a castle for Jodorowsky to write in, and when his screenplay was finished, the auteur set about recruiting collaborators, or as he put it, fellow spiritual warriors. The first of these was Jean Mobius Girard, one of France's most acclaimed comic artists, working at what Jodorowsky was called a superhuman pace, Girard broke down the entire film into a storyboard of 3,000 drawings. He began with a long, unbroken shot inspired by the opening of Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, the difference being that the camera doesn't just move around a town, it crosses the universe, and then ended with pictures of Paul being murdered and then transforming into a sentient planet before flying off to spread good vibes throughout the galaxy. Needless to say, none of this happens in Herbert's novel. But I gotta say, this whole opening sequence is pretty ambitious. I wonder how much of this they could have actually pulled off with 1970 special effects. Because if they could have pulled this off, that would have been actually a really cool opening for a movie. And now this here, obviously, I think this here is what the Sardaukar would have looked like. I think this was actually a Sardaukar uniform. Jodorowsky's gathered his other spiritual warriors in Paris to handle the visual effects. He employed Dan O'Bannon, who worked on John Carpenter's debut film Dark Star, to create the villain's home planet. He picked H.R. Giger, a Swiss artist who specialized in sleekly sinister biomechanical horrors. And most of the film's music was to be provided by Britain's prog rock superstars Pink Floyd, who had just released their 8th album, Dark Side of the Moon. Yeah, that's the other thing. This would have had like the most freakiest soundtrack, this movie, if it had been made. Because he wanted to have different rock bands represent each planet, and it would have been such a strange movie. To visualize the film's spacecraft, Jodorowsky hired Chris Foss, a British artist known for his airbrush paintings on the covers of Isaac Asimov's novels, and his line drawings in the groundbreaking sex manual, The Joy of Sex, in Jodorowsky's introduction to a later book of Foss' paintings. The director explains he expected from the artist, I wanted jewels, machine animals, soul mechanisms, womb ships, antechambers for rebirth into other dimensions, horror ships driven by the semen of our passionate ejaculations, hummingbird ornithopters which fly us to sip the ancient nectar of the dwarf stars, giving us the juice of eternity. Caterpillar-tracked hot rods so vast that their tails would disappear behind the horizon. Machines greater than suns, wandering, crazed and rusted, whimpering like dogs seeking a master, thinking wheels hidden behind meteorites, waiting camouflaged as metallic rocks for a drop of life to pass through those lost galactic fringes, to slake thirsty tanks with psychedelic secretions. How could Foss resist? He was so eccentric, this guy. It's like mind-blowing how eccentric. And it's interesting because he's so eccentric, he started like drawing even more eccentric people into the circle. Here's a picture of H.R. Giger, and here's some of the paintings that he did for the Dune film. Now, actually, some of these got recycled into the Prometheus film. When you watch this one right here, this strange, like with the head and all that, they kind of reused that for Ridley Scott's Prometheus. Now, all Jodorowsky needed were actors. In the role of the Messianic Paul, he cast his own son Brontis, who was then subject to 2 years of intensive martial arts training. Brontis Jodorowsky went on to play Nicholas Flamel in last year's Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. But the director looked further afield for the rest of his cast, signing up such legendary figures as Mick Jagger, David Carradine, Udo Kier, and Orson Welles. Yeah, because Mick Jagger was going to be Fade Rauth. That would have been really interesting. That would have been really strange. Welles consented to appear in the film after Jodorowsky promised to buy him dinner in his favorite Paris restaurant every night of the shoot. But he wasn't the film's biggest or most demanding star. To play the Emperor of the Galaxy, Jodorowsky approached none other than Salvador Dali. When they met in San Regis Hotel in New York, Dali told Jodorowsky that he was interested, but that he had a few conditions. The Emperor's throne had to be a toilet made of 2 intersecting dolphins. Dali's own friends had to play the Emperor's courtiers, and he wouldn't be reading Jodorowsky's script. My ideas are better than yours, reasoned Dali. He also dreamt of being the highest paid actor in Hollywood history, so he asked for $100,000 per hour. Jodorowsky accepted and then cut down the Emperor's scenes so that Dali would be needed for no more than a half hour. The rest of his lines would be spoken by a robotic lookalike. There's no way this could have ever gotten off the ground. You got these guys all getting together who are super artistic, super eccentric, and completely uncompromising in their vision. So, like, the creative differences, if this had even gotten to the stage where they were actually making the film, imagine the drama that would have went on these sets with the guys like this. As crafty as this was, Dune was getting expensive, and in late 1975, Jodorowsky and Seydoux flew to Los Angeles to secure the final $5 million they needed before the film could go into production, though they brought with them a specially printed hardback book the size of a breeze block containing the screenplay. Girard's storyboards and designs by Giger, Foss, and O'Bannon. Every detail was there, and yet no one could believe that the taboo-smashing madman behind El Topo, the Holy Mountain, could pull it off. Everything was great except the director, remembers Seydoux in the documentary. Yeah, that's the problem. Like, you got there was no give. Like you had the guys that were really eccentric and probably really big egos and very narrow-minded in what they're, well, not narrow-minded, but so set on their vision that there was zero compromise. This may seem monstrously unfair considering the methodical preparation Jodorowsky had put in, but his refusal to compromise on the film's running time just might have been a factor. Hollywood wanted Dune to be 2 hours long. Jodorowsky thought that 10 or 12 hours would be more appropriate. In their circumstances, you can hardly blame the studio executives who decided that if they were going to bankroll one space opera featuring a desert planet and a young hero who developed psychic powers, then it wasn't going to be Dune. It was going to be Star Wars. Still, Jodorowsky's work didn't go to waste. He and Girard recycled many of their concepts for a series of graphic novels, The Incal, which began publishing in 1980. O'Bannon went on to make Alien with Ridley Scott, and he brought 3 of his colleagues from Paris with him, Girard, Foss, and Giger. Meanwhile, the illustrated Dune screenplay was passed around Hollywood, and you can glimpse its influence, whether conscious or unconscious, on Flash Gordon, The Terminator, The Fifth Element, and numerous other science fiction hits. Jodorowsky's visionary folly had quite an impact for a film that wasn't made. If it had gone ahead, who knows how seismic the impact might have been. This is a pretty interesting article, but I think this guy is really looking at the past with rose-colored glasses here. There were so many pitfalls for this film. Like, if they even gotten approved, then there would have been clashes with writers, actors, all these egos on set. This would have been like the craziest production I could only imagine with all these guys together. They were really eccentric, really demanding, like Orson Welles and Jodorowsky and this Dolly guy. It would have been crazy. It would have been crazy. Now, if the movie had been made, there's no way, I mean, if he wasn't going to budge on the length of time, like 10 or 12 hours, like how long are you going to sit in the movie theater? Like, there's no way this would have ever been made. Like, there's no way, that's not even like reasonable to make a 10 or 12 hour long movie. I mean, if they were going to go that route, they should have just did it as a mini-series on TV or something and had it 10 or 12 episodes. But now, I'm kind of skeptical on when they go on to say how influential the ideas were because the script got passed around, that it went on to influence all these other movies. That I'm a little bit skeptical of. For sure, probably, for sure some ideas got recycled, from that book. Obviously, some of H.R. Giger, his designs got recycled into the Alien films and stuff like that. But if this movie had gotten made and he had gotten his way with it, it would have been colossal flop. There's no way. He would have had to have compromised somewhere to even get the film made. Like, he would have had it shortened down to like a reasonable runtime of 2 hours. You might have gotten away with 3 hours because, like, no one's going to go see this movie that's 10 hours long. So it was just crazy. But if it, let's just say the movie got made and say somehow he did compromise and they got it shortened down to 2-3 hours. I think it was so far removed from the source material, it would have flopped. Probably worse than David Lynch's version did. It would be like David Lynch's. It would be regarded the same way David Lynch's version is now. Probably worse. It would have became a cult classic. It would have been this weird spectacle of a film that out of sheer, let's watch that really weird Dune movie that is like almost has nothing to do with Dune. There's a lot of movies that are made and when they stray away from the source material, they don't go over well. Like Masters of the Universe, that movie that came out in 1987. Movies like that. There's been a lot of movies like that. that they just don't click. Especially Dune fans, you know, they know their source material pretty well. So they went and seen, like, what is this thing? That's what they would have been saying to themselves. I think they would have been almost better off going, if they wanted to go this weird route with this film, you could have, since they made this into a series of graphic novels, and they could have made it into another sci-fi movie and just not have called it Dune. They could have made the Incal into a sci-fi movie, like a 2 or 3 hour sci-fi movie. I mean, the guys had to have compromised, or that's kind of like, I guess, the problem. We have guys that are so visionary and so out there and so eccentric that they don't want, you can't talk to them, you can't, you know, they won't listen to any of their guys around them. And so, you know, that's not good if you're not willing to at least compromise. If you're making a project, you got to be willing to, you know, listen to other people's ideas and accept criticism and compromise. You know, it's kind of like a team effort. If not, you're gonna have like if you're just surrounded by yes men, your movie's not going to turn out as good as it could be. Good example of that is Star Wars prequels. Like, no one would say anything to George Lucas. So that's how you ended up with Jar Jar Binks. But, I mean, it's an interesting, like, what-if scenario. But, yeah, I think it would be just one of those bizarre films that, you know, people would be... It would be a cult classic, but, you know, it was a film that people would still be waiting for. We would have to have even waited longer for a proper Dune movie. At least the David Lynch movie was a lot closer to the book than this. Whatever this was, he was going to make ever would have been. But interesting article nonetheless. But anyway, that's all I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. Thank you to all of my subscribers, and thank you for watching this video. And if you're new to the channel, like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to hit the bell icon for notification when new videos are uploaded.